We are in the midst of a sermon series on Bible heroes, which is very apt given the weekend where we remember fallen heroes. We have looked at Joseph, a young favored son who is torn from his father by his brother's jealousy. And despite slavery and setbacks and imprisonment, God is at work in Joseph's life. And in the end, Joseph is reconciled with his brothers. What you meant for evil, God used for good. How good it is when brothers live together in harmony. And then we looked at Esther, another Bible hero, a young woman taken from her adoptive family and entered into a king's beauty pageant. And although she wins, her position as royal arm candy is shaky at best. Through the bold, godly advice of her uncle Mordecai, Esther learns to choose God's mission for her life over the devil's shadow mission. Perhaps you became queen for such a time as this. If I perish, I perish. And now we come to Daniel. Like Joseph and Esther, Daniel's story begins in the midst of turmoil. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. The Babylonian king has asked for a certain type of servant. The qualifications are listed for us. He wants young men of royal lineage who are in shape and smart. He's not looking for day laborers. He has something else in mind for this group. And Daniel is one of the chosen young men. And from this we know a couple of things about Daniel already. First of all, we know he comes from a royal lineage. He's part of the royal family, a prince or a nobleman's son. We know that he's smart. He's probably well educated. He's quick to grasp concepts. And he's good looking. He's a ladies' man. He has had it all, the looks, the smarts, daddy's money. And knowing this, we might assume that he's been a bit of a playboy around Jerusalem. But in the midst of Daniel's good time, the Babylonians show up. Verse 3, then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Being royalty, this group is already educated, but they're about to attend Babylonian grad school, graduate studies in Babylonian culture, a 3-year full immersion crash course. New student orientation begins with a meal. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. Lots of things begin with meals. William Gadory is a 15-year-old from Quebec. Around the dinner table, the conversations he starts have to do with Mayan history and Mayan astronomy. He is passionate about these subjects. And one of the things that puzzled William and many Mayan civilization scholars is the location of Mayan cities. Unlike other civilizations who build their cities along water or roadways, the Mayan cities seem to be dotted across the map in random locations. At dinner one night, William was talking about this with his parents, and he pulled out a topographical map of the cities. And in that instant, their location looked familiar to him. He did a little more digging, and he hypothesized that the Maya civilization chose city locations according to star constellations. With a little more research, he found that indeed the major Mayan cities lined up exactly with these constellations. And then he did something remarkable. 15-year-old William plotted cities and found that there was one star that didn't have a city. So he hopped on Google Earth and he found an undiscovered Mayan civilization. He has since gone to experts, and this city is deep in the Yucatan Peninsula. It's in the jungle. No one has explored this part of the world, and there is an expedition scheduled for this summer. 15-year-old William was asked to name the city, and as a 15-year-old might, he named it Kaakchi, which means mouth of fire. He is excited to go and explore the city he has found. Studying culture can tell us a lot about the people and the places and the civilization. William's story proves that you don't have to know the most, be the most learned, to have the most insight. Daniel has been transplanted from Jerusalem to Babylon to study Babylonian culture. He's learning about the people, about the places. As far as we know, Daniel is not a great scholar of Jewish literature and Mosaic law. He's just a privileged, smart, good-looking kid. But when he gets to the king's banquet hall for orientation welcome dinner, something doesn't sit right with him. If you grew up with the My Bible Friend storybooks, you may know the picture that springs into my mind when I think of Daniel and the Babylonian banquet table. The picture is of a long table full of all kinds of food, and the Judean boys stand uncomfortably to one corner. In the middle of that table is a roast pig with an apple in its mouth. This was very intriguing to me as a child. Daniel has grown up with a Jewish diet. He's not used to roast pigs in the middle of his table. He's used to salads and pasta and veggie burger and fry chick out of a can. And when he sees this roast pig, it's just a little too much to handle. He sees the table, and even though he's not the most learned, he has insight. Daniel knows that God has asked for obedience. When God delivered the children of Israel from Egypt, he asked them to be his people, and in return, he promised to be their God, to watch over them and take care of them. He gave them guidelines to live a happy, joy-filled life, and he asked them to obey those guidelines. Over and over, when Israel disobeys, bad things happen. Daniel knows this. He is living it. Israel has disobeyed God, and God has delivered them into the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Daniel looks at the food on the table, and he sees an opportunity to obey. So he asks a question. It never hurts to ask a question, does it? The worst thing that can happen is the person you're asking can say no, and you end up in the same exact spot that you started in. Last Sunday morning, there were a few of us who were involved with Pathfinders, and we were up at Gladstone making burgers for Adventure Fun Day. Well, on the way back, you have to stop at the outlets because you're going right past them. And I have had my eye on a pair of winter boots. As you know, I'm moving to Michigan, so winter boots are going to be a big part of my life. So I've been looking at them, but I've been waiting for them to go on clearance because they're really nice boots and they have a really nice price tag on them. So I went in and I looked and they had the boots, but not in my size. So I was disappointed. I went to a couple other stores. I ran into Sandy and Sharon and Lucas in the kitchen store. And on my way back to my car, I was walking past the store with the boots. And I thought, maybe I'll just go in and ask. They're on clearance. They definitely don't have another pair in the back, but I'll just ask. Long story short, I now own a pair of highly discounted, waterproof winter boots. It never hurts to ask. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. This is where God enters Daniel's narrative. God sees what is happening in Daniel's life and heart, and he recognizes the obedience. Verse 9, now God caused the official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king who has assigned your food and drink. In response to the official's worries, Daniel proposes a test. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat from the royal table, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Daniel is willing to bet on obedience, to put his money where his mouth is because he's obeying God. He knows the bet is fixed. Verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Daniel and his 3 friends bet on obedience, and it pays off. God blesses them mightily. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. This becomes very important in Daniel's story. They finish their studies, they earn their degrees and graduate summa cum laude. They enter the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. Daniel has learned that it never hurts to ask, and obedience matters. But Daniel's story is just beginning. The king has a dream which troubles him greatly. In Babylonian culture, dreams are especially important because they are thought to be the means by which gods communicate with humanity. But Nebuchadnezzar can't remember his dream. This is distressing. A God has given you a message and you don't remember it. So he calls together all the wise men, his advisors, and he tasks them with figuring out what he dreamed and what that dream means. It's an impossible task. No one can do it. And in a fit of anger, Nebuchadnezzar orders the execution of all the wise men in Babylon, including Daniel. When the executioner comes knocking on his door, Daniel asks a question. Because he's learned that it never hurts to ask. And so Daniel goes before the king and asks for a little more time. Then he comes back and he falls on his knees with his friends. They pray their problems and God grants their request. He reveals the dream and its meaning to Daniel. Daniel goes back to the king, and I like their interaction. Daniel chapter 2, verse 26. The king asked Daniel, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. No, I can't tell you. This is the king who just flew off the handle and ordered everyone to be executed. Do you really want to say no to this guy, Daniel? But it keeps going. No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Daniel goes on to interpret the dream. He uses the talents God has given him, and he is careful to make sure Nebuchadnezzar knows that it is God and not him. He gives God the glory. Daniel has learned that it never hurts to ask. Obedience matters, and the glory belongs to God. Nebuchadnezzar has another troubling dream. Again, his wise man can't interpret it. He's a bit slow, isn't he? It takes a while, but finally he calls on Daniel. And again, Daniel uses the talents God has given him. He is careful to give God the glory, and he interprets the dream. King Nebuchadnezzar could learn a lesson or two from Daniel. But he doesn't listen, he doesn't give God the glory, and he isn't obedient. Time passes. A new king comes to the throne, and Daniel continues to serve at court, to use the talents God has given him, to be obedient to God's law and love, and to give God the glory in all parts of his life. King Belshazzar follows in Nebuchadnezzar's footsteps. He is proud and stubborn, and he doesn't listen well. He throws an especially raucous party one evening, and God sends a warning message, a message that none of the wise men can interpret. And so Daniel is called. He uses the talent God has given him, and he interprets the message, and in the process he is careful to make sure that Belshazzar knows it is God who has given him this talent. He gives God the glory. That same night, Belteshazzar is deposed, and Darius the Mede takes over the kingdom. Daniel remains at court. Despite this coup of leadership, he continues working for the new king, and God blesses him. Daniel lives a faithful life, obedient to God's law, and he glorifies God in all that he does. We see that in this new administration, Daniel once again rises to the top. Daniel chapter 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius, the new king, to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Daniel's God-given talents are apparent. He's the king's favorite, the teacher's pet. And while that's good for Daniel, it doesn't make him very popular on the playground. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God. Daniel does his job. He does it well, and he isn't making any profit on the side. He's an honest politician in a crooked and corrupt system. His opponents try to run a smear campaign, but the worst thing they can come up with, the dirt under the rug, the skeleton in the closet, is that Daniel is obedient to God. The administrators and satraps come up with a plan. They go before the king and tell him how wonderful he is, how great he is, how worthy of praise, and this is something that Darius likes to hear. They get him to decree that for 30 days, no one is allowed to pray to anyone but King Darius. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Daniel has learned that it never hurts to ask. Obedience matters, and the glory is God's. So when he encounters a political trap tailored to ensnare him, he sticks with his routine. A routine that has proven trustworthy time and again. He takes his problems to his knees. He asks God for a way out. Whatever the consequences, Daniel is determined to obey and glorify God. It would be easy for Daniel to change his routine, wouldn't it? Maybe pray in his closet or at least close the curtains. We often let outside circumstances influence us, don't we? In her book, Mudhouse Sabbath, Lauren Winner writes about her experience of converting to Christianity from Judaism. One of the things she misses the most about her Jewish faith is the routine of prayer. The prayers don't change. You pray the same prayer every day, year after year. And eventually, if you keep at it, keep going through these motions, even if you don't feel like it, they become meaningful again. It doesn't matter if you feel like praying that prayer, you pray it anyway. She sees going through the motions as a positive thing. It leaves a spiritual avenue open for God to work in our life. The communication lines stay open, and it doesn't let our feelings get the better of us. This is something we're not great at. I know I'm not great at it. It is all too easy to put off reading my Bible because I don't feel like it, or I'm too tired. To skip prayer meeting because it's been a long week. To get out of the routine of my spiritual life, to close the curtains. But Daniel doesn't hide. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. I don't know about you, but this group of administrators and satraps sounds to me a little bit like a group of 12-year-old girls. They come up with a plan. It really will only ensnare the one person that they don't like very much. And then they go as a group to make sure that what they think is going to happen has really happened. And the second they see it, they run to tattle on Daniel. I hope there's never a group of 12-year-old girls out to get you. But if there is, the way they find Daniel is a pretty good way to be found. With your hand in the cookie jar of prayer. They run to King Darius to tattle on Daniel. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to rescue him. Darius finally sees the scheming satraps for what they are. He realizes that he has been duped. He has stepped perfectly into their well-laid plan against Daniel. He realizes he has fallen prey to their flattery and double talk. They have him. The laws of the Medes and the Persians state that no kingly decree can be reversed. Darius is stuck. And so he gathers the lawyers, and they work on it till sundown. But then, begrudgingly, Darius gives the go-ahead. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Darius knows Daniel. They've spent a lot of time together running the kingdom. He has plans to put Daniel over all the other officials, to be his vice president, as it were. He knows of Daniel's faith and obedience. He knows that Daniel serves God continually, doesn't take a break, a day off from worshiping God, that he worships him alone, and he gives glory to God whenever there's a chance. Darius knows of Daniel's faith, but he doesn't see how Daniel can survive a night with hungry lions. The king spends the night tossing and turning, and when the sun rises, he runs to the lion's den. Logic tells him that Daniel is dead, but he has to check. When he came near to the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" A moment passes. The heavy feeling in the pit of Darius's stomach tightens in disappointment. And then Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God has sent his angel and has shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Daniel has learned that it never hurts to ask. Obedience matters, and the glory is always God's. His life is a testament to this. Daniel is willing to go to Babylon, to interpret dreams, to serve foreign kings, to die in a lion's den, if that is how his life can show who his God is. It's easy to reduce Daniel's story to one episode or another, a few brightly colored pictures in a Bible Friends storybook. But when you take his life from start to finish, it is an amazing story of lifelong reliance and obedience to God. When he encounters trouble, Daniel always falls to his knees. He trusts God and is obedient even when the logical thing to do would be to run or hide. Daniel uses the gifts God has given him. He thrives in the place God has put him even when it's hard, and he never stops obeying. We can learn lessons from our hero Daniel, can't we? He isn't prideful. He always gives God the glory. Do we give God the glory? When we succeed, when we get a promotion, is it God who we glorify? Is it God who we thank? Daniel asks, he knocks, he seeks. He knows that it never hurts to ask. Do I ask? Do I fall to my knees when I have a problem? Do I ask God for deliverance, knowing that he might not answer the way I want him to? Daniel is obedient to God's law. He goes through the motions regardless of his own feelings, regardless of the inconvenience of a night with the lions. Do you obey God's law? Do you stick to it even when you don't feel like it? Do you go through the motions until they become meaningful again? Are you obedient to the call God has placed on your life? We can live faithful, faith-filled Daniel lives. We can take all our problems to God. We can use the gifts he has given us if we only are willing to obey. It never hurts to ask. Obedience matters. The glory is always God's. Will you pray with me? Heavenly Father, we want to glorify you today for who you are and what you have done, not only in the lives of Bible heroes like Joseph and Esther and Daniel, but in our lives, in the lives of the men and women who didn't come home, who we honor this weekend. You were active in Daniel's life. We pray that you would be active in ours. Give us boldness to ask, to fall to our knees, to obey, and to glorify you. Amen.